Okay, can you guys see my screen okay? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for joining us today for the Eastern Ontario Native Seed Partnership webinar series. My name is Jeanette Hoope, and I am the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Native Seed Program Coordinator. The Eastern Ontario Native Seed Partnership is led by the Canadian Wildlife Federation as a part of the National Native Seed Strategy, which is funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada under the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. So today's webinar is entitled Native Seed 101 and will be presented by Jenny Fortier. So to open up this webinar, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So as we gather in this virtual space, this event is largely taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I honor their deep and ongoing connection to this land, as well as the histories, cultures, and contributions of all Indigenous peoples in the region. I recognize the importance of truth, reconciliation, and justice, and affirm that Indigenous peoples are rights holders. I remain committed to fostering respectful and reciprocal relationships. If you're unsure of the traditional territory that you're joining us from today, I encourage you to visit native-land.ca after the webinar to learn more. Next, I'll take a moment to introduce today's speaker, Jenny Fortier. So Jenny is the founder and CEO of Northern Wildflowers, Inc., a native seed and seed technology company based in Sudbury, Ontario. With over 15 years of experience in habitat restoration, she holds a Bachelor of Science from Laurentian University and a Master's of Science from Trent University. She is a Master Gardener with a certificate in Sustainable Landscape Design. Jenny also brings a formal background in economic development, and she led green tech, agriculture, and med tech portfolios for the federal government. In addition, she serves as an agribusiness mentor with the Rural Agri Innovation Network, supporting the next generation of agricultural entrepreneurs. Jenny has served on a variety of boards with regional, national, and international environmental and policy mandates. These include Sudbury's Regreening Committee, the Canadian Land Reclamation Association's Ontario chapter, and the Society for Ecological Restoration's International Network for Seed-Based Restoration. She is also the chair and a founding member of the Native Seed Producers of Canada. In 2024, Jenny completed Arlene Dickinson's Venture Park Labs Accelerator and was nominated for the RBC Woman of Influence Awards. Northern Wildflowers is on a rapid growth trajectory, at least doubling its native seed production volume year over year in the past 3 years. In 2025, the company shipped its 20,000th online order and expanded its retail presence to over 150 locations from coast to coast. Northern Wildflower plays a pivotal role in strengthening the Canadian seed supply chain by supporting and collaborating with farmers across the country, including more than 20 small organic Canadian farms that contract grow native wildflower and vegetable seed crops for the company. In 2025, Northern Wildflower supplied seeds for more than 60 large-scale restoration projects across eastern and central Canada. Northern Wildflower's dedication to sustainability was recognized with the RT Foundation Award in 2021, and in 2023, they were awarded a Desjardins Good Spark Award and were finalists in the Bell Business Excellence Awards. In 2025, they were awarded the Government of Ontario's Excellence in Agriculture Award. So today, Jenny will deliver an interactive session designed to boost your confidence navigating the native seed world. She'll explore how native seed is produced, priced, and selected, share resources to help with planning seed-based restoration projects, best practices for working with native seed producers, and what to look for in seed mix design and sourcing. She hopes you'll gain practical insights about making more informed choices related to seed-based restoration projects. Jenny is happy to take questions after her presentation. Please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A box as we proceed. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Jenny.
Hi, thank you, Jeanette. That was the most comprehensive intro, I think, ever. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here today. I'll get started. I should mention, here, let me share my screen. There's a lot more here than I'm going to have time to talk about. So, I'm hoping we have a lot of time for discussion at the end. And I'm also happy to keep chatting. And you'll see that there's lots happening in this space too, offline, if anyone wants to keep the conversation going. So there's a lot to go through here. And there's a lot I wanted to pack in. So let's get started. So a little bit about me. I really don't really need to say much more. Jeanette provided a really thorough introduction, but I'll just say I've been in native seed for about 15 years, and my formal background is in conservation genetics, in field biology, but my career has taken all kinds of really interesting twists and turns that have taken me into, NGOs and public sector, and then over to private sector as a producer. So Northern Wildflowers is the company that I founded about 15 years ago, and we're located in Sudbury, and our mission is to help everyone create habitat and outdoor spaces that spark joy. So that's what guides us as a company. We produce native seed, but we also produce vegetable seed, and we work with a lot of Canadian farmers who produce for us. We're really, really passionate about market and sector development. So we have a 40-acre property just west of Sudbury. You'll see our little dot on the map there. And we farm in, true Sudbury habitat. We've got, some rolling rocky hills and a lot of clay. And so, true native habitat we're working with. We farm and wild collect a total of about 100 different species from mostly forbs. We don't really deal in native grasses so much on our farm, and then native tree and shrub and some wetland species. And so our seed goes to home gardeners, restoration practitioners, really anyone who uses seed. We try to convince to incorporate some native seed into what they're doing. We have 9 staff, and I mentioned our contract growers. That's really important to us, that we're growing the capacity of native seed production around us. So we work with a lot of growers who produce for us. And we serve really, any sector that needs seed, and that's working with land management. So I have a little bit of kind of an independent, kind of poll, and Jeanette did a great job asking in the registration what sort of makeup the group is. That helps me to sort of speak a little bit better to whoever is listening and where they're from. And so if you wanted to pop in the chat where where you fit in, Jeanette's results from the poll was that most of the folks participating were, seed like users or prescribers in some way, shape, or form. There was a small amount of producers. I don't know if there were any nurseries, native plant nurseries, but I do see some when I look at the list of attendees. So hi everyone. Feel free to put in the chat where you fit in an intro, totally, if you'd like. Great time for us to get to know each other across the board here. So I'm curious how you would rate your native seed knowledge. Feel free to throw that in the chat too. Are you super experienced? Is this new to you? Are you, an expert? And hopefully maybe by the end of the day, you feel a little bit more knowledgeable. Okay. So let's dive into native seed production. So I put these pictures up here because this is what most people think of when they think of native seed production. There is a lot of confusion about what it looks like to produce native seed. A lot of folks think that a native seed is produced at a plant nursery or at botanical gardens. Those can certainly be part of that, of the process of producing natives, but they're not the main way that natives are produced. Most native seed produced that go to market are field grown, so they're farmed. I also put a picture of a wild stand. There's a lot of folks who are under the impression that our native seed in market is coming from wild collection. While that does make up a small amount of native seed in market, it's not an efficient enough mode of production for it to make up a large part. It's definitely an important part of the process, but it's not the main way that native seed is produced. So native seed production is farming. So it can be field grown, which is where the largest volume of native seed comes from, and it can be wild collected. That will be a smaller volume of seed. It's more often tree and shrub seed, obviously, and it can be seed for amplification, or the wild seed that is sustainably taken from the wild and used to create production plots of farm produced seed. And so, you know, seed production can look a lot of different ways when it comes to native seed. You know, we can have kind of messier looking rows if you're engaging in ecological farming. If you're not using a lot of chemical weed suppression, you are going to have a little bit of a messier look, which is okay. Or you can have a really clean looking, kind of perfectly manicured stand, which, you know, usually is, you know, achieved by various mechanical and chemical means. And so native for production, I tell folks, you know, picture a field of canola. Now imagine, you know, you're letting those beautiful yellow canola flowers go to seed. Seed production of natives is exactly the same when you're dealing with native forbs. You're just letting them go to seed, you're harvesting the seed, you're drying it, and then you're cleaning it. And so I've got a video here. So this is from about 4 years ago at our farm. This is one of our first test plots where we were determining, like, will this grow well here? And so this will just show you what, you know, they can be big plots, they can be small plots, depending on the grower. And let's see if this video works for us. I was really enjoying that plot of wild bergamot. So, so that's what native seed production looks like. It is farming, guys. Make no mistake. And native grass production is a little similar but different. Generally, native grass production is done on a larger scale, using larger equipment. Generally, most of our native grass production is happening in areas where the landscape is quite flat, because the equipment needed for harvesting, you know, does not allow for really hilly landscapes. And so usually native grass production is done on a much larger scale, using more traditional agricultural equipment, whereas a lot of native seed production is collected. Some is collected by hand, some is collected using traditional agricultural equipment like combines, some is collected using small hand tools. It all varies, but generally native grass production is on a much larger scale, just based on market prices for grasses. Okay, so here's one of my little quiz questions. How many years does it typically take to bring a new native seed crop into production? So is it 1, 2, 3, 4 plus, or not sure? So feel free to just kind of answer that one in your head, or if you want to throw it in the chat, go ahead. So usually it's 4+ years, but different crops vary, and different farms also vary in their production process, but usually it's 4 or more years. We have some crops where it's like 7 or more years. And so here's how that looks. So native seed farming is very different from a lot of traditional annual farming, where you put the seed in, you harvest that year, bingo bongo, you've got a crop to sell. You do it the next year, you can do something different, you can restart. Native seed is totally different. So you're dealing with long-lived perennials. So that in itself is a totally different kettle of fish. So year one, generally you would scout healthy wild populations. So when we're looking at seed for restoration, you want seed with wild genetics. You want genetic diversity over genetic uniformity. So you want to find healthy wild populations that can sustain a small wild collection is the first thing. And so sometimes that takes a while to find. So you're spending, a season probably scouting these populations, checking on them for readiness, for quality, for disease, all of those things. So you would collect, clean, and test that seed to make sure that you really do have good quality seed to start with, because a lot is going to ride on this foundation seed that you're collecting. And then you can sow the seed directly into the field, or you can start it in plug trays, which is where the interface between, having some nursery infrastructure can be helpful for native seed production, but it's not necessary, but it can be helpful. So you can do either of those things. We have some crops that we direct seed. We have some crops we start with plugs. It depends on the crop and it depends on the farm. We have heavy clay, and a lot of things don't like to germinate in heavy clay. So we do start some things in plugs and some via seed. Depending to how quickly you want things to get started, it can be much faster to start with plugs, and you can plan your spacing and be more exact with plugs than seed. And then you prepare your production area. So in this example, do I have a video here? Here we're solarizing some small production area. You don't need the audio, I don't think. So, you've got to get that area ready. So that's all happening in the same year, ideally. And then year 2, if you started with your plugs and you stratified your seed and you overwintered them, they've overwintered. Year 2, spring, you're putting those plugs into the field, or your direct seeded seed is starting to come up, and you're getting an idea of how things are looking. Was the seed happy to come up here? Was it not? When you transplanted, was it happy? Was it not? And you're really evaluating and tracking the health of that production bed. You're doing things like roguing. As those plants are growing, you might get some, that are just really, although you want genetic diversity, you might get some that are showing some really weird traits that might be undesirable. So you might rogue those, you might thin, you might amend the soil. We have slightly acidic soil, so we find ourselves adding dolomitic lime to our soil, more or less depending on the crop and where they're happy. And there's generally no seed produced. So that's year 2. So this was, I popped this in there to show it's a lot of trial and error. So this is a small kind of test plot of Maximilian sunflower. And it was really, really happy on our farm for 2 to 3 years. And then it just was really not happy after that. And so we did some soil testing to determine, okay, that variety was not liking, the acidity was creeping down in that area, and that variety was not liking it. So we amended. And so it's a lot of trial and error with a lot of these different crops. So year 3, you've got 2-year-old plants. Hopefully they happily survived the winter. If you have heavy clay, that's always a risk. They get shot out of the clay over the winter. You continue to care for your beds, do all the same things you did the first year, and you may get a first year of seed production in year 3. Depends on the variety. We have some varieties that take 4 to 5 years to start producing seed. So some of them, you wait a lot longer. And again, this part varies from farm to farm, but for a lot of farms, I would say most, they don't sell the first year seed production. Generally, it's just lower quality. And so we will look at it, we'll clean it, we'll evaluate it, we'll standard test it, but we generally won't sell it until year 4. So that's when you have a nice yield of seed. And again, some species, it's like year 6 or 7 by the time you have that second year of seed production. And again, according to different species, some live 10 years, some live 3 years. And so you have to start thinking about restarting that process and replenishing that plot with fresh genetics. So you may be going out even before year 4 to get new stock seed of fresh genetics, because you don't want your field to become domesticated and to, you know, move away from wild sort of traits. So you want to keep replenishing, not just because your plants are only going to live so long, but also because you don't want to be too many generations from wild. So that's what that cycle looks like. So very different from growing corn, where everything happens in a season and there's a return on that investment and that certainty a lot sooner. Okay. So this is sort of the foundation that we're going to build a lot of our conversation on after this. So what does it look like to purchase native seed then, when we talk a little bit about what it looks like to produce it? So again, you guys can answer if you'd like in the chat, or just kind of to yourselves. Where do you think the price of native seed compares to commercial ornamental seed or turf seed? Is the price similar? Is the ornamental seed more? Is the native 2 times more, 5 to 15, or 20 times more? So I know based on the list, there's a lot of folks here who procure seeds. So I have a feeling you guys are probably all in the same area. So it can really be usually anywhere between C and E, depending on the variety. So some varieties can be harvested mechanically. That brings down the cost of production majorly, especially if it's a productive variety. Not every variety produces a lot of seed. That produces seed after, you know, year 1 or 2. Some varieties can only be collected by hand. So natives do this interesting thing where part of the plant matures, and then another part matures, and then another part matures. So if you collect all of the seed at once, like you would for corn or wheat or rye or barley, you're only going to get, for most native forbs, 20% of that seed will be ready. So you've wasted 80% of your seed crop that isn't viable yet. So there needs to be a person standing over that seed crop and grabbing what is ready and leaving what isn't, and doing that repeatedly over usually several weeks. And so that brings up the cost of that crop quite a bit. So, so usually 5 to 15 times more expensive for most native forbs. Native grasses are closer to their non-native counterparts. They're still more expensive, but they're using a lot of the same infrastructure. So that brings the price a little closer. And then when you get something that's exclusively wild collected, you're going to be looking at the 20 or more times more expensive. Because again, just that cost of bringing the seed to you is so much more. If you picture the difference between going to a grocery store and buying strawberries that are farmed versus, not that this is at the grocery store, but wild collected strawberries where someone had to travel, you know, and walk and get back and forth to their vehicle with this crop, it makes the cost of that crop much higher. So you're always going to pay more for wild collected things for that reason. So why does native seed cost more? We talked about the cost of establishing, again, multi-year production timelines. It just, you know, you put a lot more resources into that crop than you would for an annual, but you're still dealing with the same price per acre for land and all the infrastructure. You will have lower yields for a lot of natives. They're not bred for high production. You know, when you're dealing with seed for restoration, you are really trying to maintain wild genetics. So you don't have, you know, corn that's gone through so much human intervention in terms of its production. You have, you know, the seed production of that wild plant. And so sometimes it's very low. It is specialized, risky agronomy. You have producers who are getting to know, rather than 1 or 2 crops, who are getting to know dozens and dozens of crops. And for many of them, there's no standard operating procedures for how to best produce them, clean their seed, and keep, you know, plants alive and happy for production. So there is, you know, the cost of that unknown. And most seed producers who are in the space of producing natives they're all in there because they're on, you know, a mission. They're in there because they care and they, you know, are value driven, and most are using ecological growing practices. So, you know, they're not employing chemical control for their growing. So that will be more labor intensive and more expensive. So that all contributes to the cost of natives, as well as um, the labor and expertise is quite substantial. It does take a really, really long time to build up that knowledge when you're dealing with so many different varieties that need to be handled and cleaned so many different ways. They are still niche products. There is, of course, a growing demand in natives. Producers see it, are, you know, responding, but it is still a niche product, you know, where production is still quite small in response to a demand that's not comparable to large agriculture. So you are going to see that economy of scale just not be there as much. And then it is quite costly to farm in Canada. We do have some of the highest farming um, expenses really across all of the global farming hubs. So those all contribute to a higher cost for natives. So that brings us to the next question I get all of the time when we're talking about just native seed in general. And we look to the US and we say, oh my God, they like, we need to be just like them. They have so much native seed. Fundamentally, it's really comparing apples and oranges. So the big difference with the US is federal land ownership is very different. So the Bureau of Land Management manages millions of acres of land, and they are responsible for the restoration, post-fire, post-invasive species, all those things of that land, whereas our federal government does not, you know, manages a small fraction of that land mass. So that major difference creates an incredibly different situation for us. So the BLM buys, owns, and stores their own seed. So you have this massive centralized buyer in the BLM that has been growing this space for the last 25 years with multi-year, large, flexible production contracts. That has created a very stable sector and has helped large growers to scale up with the confidence of always having a buyer for their product. And their contracts also provide compensation even if the grower is not successful. So it's a really different space than we have in Canada. The BLM also owns, I mentioned, the infrastructure. So they own 3 major seed storage facilities because it's their seed. They have to store it to, you know, maintain its value, to maintain their investment. They own the cleaning equipment oftentimes, and they invest heavily in building knowledge and expertise in native seed. So that is the anchor of the entire US seed sector, is this interface with the Bureau of Land Management. So we can't really copy their model with that in mind because we don't have that same situation. The other thing that interfaces, and you know, this comes up when a lot of people ask, like, why is it so much cheaper to get native seed in the US? There's, you know, all of those reasons, but there are several states in the US where their cost of labor is very, very low. You know, and you will see that in a lot of production of grass and forage seed are coming from, you know, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, where their Canadian equivalent for wages is about $10 an hour. So major difference when you're dealing with something that's super labor intensive. And they do, you know, agriculture has a larger footprint in much of the US. And so that gives producers access to a lot more infrastructure, and they can take advantage of a really great economy of scale. That can be difficult, especially when you're looking at regional production of seed, you know, in parts of Canada that are not agricultural hotspots. it does take away the ability to take advantage of all of those assets. Okay, so now that we're talking a little bit more about the meat and potatoes of production, let's talk a little bit about regulation, oversight, quality. So how many regulatory layers do you think apply to native seed production in Canada? A, D, 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 D. I'm seeing lots of different. So one major misconception that I would like so much today to help dispel is this misconception that there is no regulation or oversight in native seed production. That is completely incorrect. So the answer here is D, 6 or more. And it depends where you are. So these are the regulations that a native seed farmer has to adhere to. And each of these has a certification, a licensing, a permit, or a reporting requirement that requires time and resources from growers. So the major regulatory tool for seed, including native seed in Canada, is the Seeds Act, which has the corresponding seed regulations which describe what has to be done to adhere to the act and what the standards are. So that's the big one. But then within that, there's a whole suite of federal, provincial, municipal, and at times regional regulations that seed producers and general farmers have to adhere to. So the regulatory burden is significant. It's not non-existent. It is significant, and it is something that makes it very difficult for new growers to get into the sector and to understand the regulations and to understand what's required of them, because there are so many different pieces to adhere to. I won't get into the specifics because it's boring. It's not fun, but there's a lot. And so, native seed is not unregulated. There's a lot of rules around how you can and cannot do things. So with the Seed Act, what's most kind of relevant to us today is the Seed Act does dictate how native seed has to be labeled, what needs to be conveyed in the labeling, and then what are the standards in terms of germination, purity, and noxious content. And so those are the things that go into what's called a seed standards test is, what is the germ rate of that crop? What is the purity? So what percent of that crop is the crop? And what percent is other things? And then there's a federal list of noxious species that are not permitted in seed lots. There's Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. There's a list of provincial noxious species that are not allowed depending where the seed is going. And so growers have to be aware of all of those things and mindful of those things. And the other thing that the main thing the Seed Act does dictate, it's really an act that was built for big ag, for big traditional ag. So a lot of it speaks to variety registration or ownership of variety genetics is really what a lot of it speaks to. So a lot of it is sort of not super relevant to natives, where we want a lot of genetic diversity and we don't want people owning the genetic stock of different things. It's different with wheat and corn and all that. So a lot of it is, that, but the labeling and then the standards piece is very clear in that act, and it does include natives. So who is growing native seed? So there are, in my adventures, from what I found, 30 to 40 commercial native seed producers in Canada. Most of them are small farm enterprises. Most of them are family enterprises, usually 5 or less staff. There's a few that are bigger, but most of them are kind of smallish. And in the last year, I've been working really hard with a group of growers to create an association of native seed producers called the Native Seed Producers of Canada. We are finally a formal association, and so we're really happy about that. I'll show you a little bit more about that. We're at nativeseedcanada.ca. And this is one of the pieces kind of missing in our puzzle in Canada is, you know, who are the growers and how do we get them involved? They should be at the table whenever we're talking about the native seed sector. And so who are they and how do we get a hold of them? And so that's what NSPC speaks to. And so it's an association that consists of farmers who are producing seed in Canada of native species for sale now. And we specifically are looking at native forb and or grass. So we're not really encompassing tree or shrub seed. That's a little bit of a different space. And our mission is to represent our sector and improve it and work together to tackle some common sector challenges so that we can produce more better seed to lead to, you know, better restoration outcomes is what, you know, I think everyone wants. So you can learn more about that group at nativeseedcanada.ca. We have 12 member producers and we coordinate with about 20 producers. I say that because not every producer that we interface with wants to, you know, or has the capacity to take part in more than what they're already doing. So there's about 20 that we talk with and update and chat with, but there's about 12 who are able and willing to take part in a little bit more sector stuff. Almost, you know, the news is good. Just about all of our producers, except for a couple that are inching towards retirement, are aggressively expanding production. So there is more native seed coming onto market all the time. But as you guys saw from the slides about production, it does take a while. You know, these aren't crops that are super fast to scale up. So, but the good news is everyone is scaling up. And so that's really nice to see. And almost all are working on sector building activities in their spaces. So, you know, I put some of the sector building stuff we do where we are. I could have just as easily shared some of the sector building stuff happening in BC or Saskatchewan or Manitoba or Quebec. You know, all of these growers are sort of doing neat, interesting things in their spaces. So feel free to take a look and see, you know, which growers are on that list that maybe you aren't aware of, or maybe you are. The other projects we're working on right now, there's more than I could list, but some that may be relevant is we are working with a group called Seed Arc to create basically a unified place where seed holding groups or entities can kind of list their stock native seed. And that addresses the challenge of helping growers to track down stock seed when they're trying to establish a new production area of something. That can be very time consuming and very difficult for us when someone comes to me and says, you know, in November, like, I really want you to produce this for me next year. If I didn't already go looking for that seed, I don't have it, but maybe there's a group that does. Maybe it's a botanical garden, or maybe it's a, you know, Ontario Park or a national park that has some. And so we're working with CEDARC to create a shared entity to sort of kind of a catalog of those things to connect producers with seed holding entities who might have stock native seed for that purpose. We also have just kind of finalized a voluntary seed source labeling program. And so that's, you know, a really great option for native growers to communicate, you know, where the seed comes from, how far is it from wild origin, some of the standards, metrics for that lot. So that's really great. You can learn more about that on our website. We also have more happening that I didn't have time for today, I don't think, but feel free, if you're on nativeseedcanada.ca, we do have a sign up for updates about, you know, events. We're going to have a virtual summit soon to really just dig more into some of this stuff for those where it's relevant and interesting. So feel free to sign up there. Super easy and fast. So getting back into seed for your projects, now that I've sort of jumped around to a little bit of the supply and what's happening. So there's lots we can talk about selecting seed, but the thing is, it is a really nuanced process because it depends where you are and what you're looking for and what your budget is and what your local growers have and what your stakeholders want. And so, as you know, many of you who take part in these projects know it is a iterative, nuanced process. But I will say communicate with your grower early and honestly, because as you saw, it does take many seasons to produce something new, or to produce something in larger quantities. So if you have a big project coming down the pipeline, talk to them early. And you know, growers already do that. They have to, because if you don't know what your customers want, you're probably not going to be around that long. But it can really help to talk to that grower before you spec out your whole project, so that you know that you can realistically get the things you want. So when you're working with a new grower, and you know, we want more new growers, we want to see them do well. Some of them will not have standards tests available, and that's okay. It's important to support those growers because standards tests are pricey, and um, they are they do use up seed. So they do, the seed is not usable. So if you have a small wild collection of something and you have to use up 250 grams of that precious clean seed for a standards test, it may not be worth it for a small lot because that may be most of your seed. So some may not have standards tests. What I suggest in those situations, just so you know what you're getting, ask for pictures, because you want to know if you're getting a bag of plant and flower parts versus a bag of seed, and the picture will really help you. If it's not a uniform, you know, distinguishable one seed, it's good to know that that's what you're getting, and you know, to plan accordingly, or to let the grower know, like, you know, that I'm drilling this, I need it cleaned better. I'm broadcasting this, I need it cleaned better. So just to have that line of communication. I do have some really great resources to help with project planning, and decision making, and I'll go over those at the very end. So a very general tip for a successful project, the most common source of failure that we have seen in the hundreds of projects we've helped with, is where you have a crew who does not do proper site prep, monitoring, or maintenance, or who has an improper seed application. So that is the most common source of failure in native seed application on large scale projects. And just know that not all contractors know how to deal with native seed. You could have a contractor who has been dealing with broadcasting turf seed for 20 years, and they will have no idea what to do with your native seed, and they will try to do what they always do and the application rates they're used to using, and it will totally cost you a fortune and be a complete failure. So just be selective, ask a lot of questions, and ask for project references. Who have you applied native seed for? Can I get their phone number? I want to talk to them. And be patient too, because there are a lot of really keen landscapers and contractors who want to get to know this space and who will take the time to build expertise, and to help their staff become really knowledgeable technicians when it comes to native seed. So look for those folks who are willing to learn, and I've got some great resources on that too. So some tips for working with seed producers: make sure your procurement policy is aligned with your project goals. So a good example is, you know, a really knowledgeable biologist on staff will come up with a great project plan, a great species list. They know where they want the seed to come from. They know the quality. And the RFP goes out, everybody bids on it, but their procurement policy dictates they have to choose the least expensive bid. So that is never going to be what that biologist wants. You're not going to get native seed be the least expensive option. It's just not. it's not the way that that looks. So make sure your procurement policy is in line, or else you can kind of spin your wheels for a long time and spin a lot of people's wheels. So check for availability before writing project specifications. I cannot tell you how many times I get calls from contractors who are like, okay, I got this project. I'm supposed to find these natives. I've been looking for weeks. I'm so frustrated. I never want to deal with natives again. They're the worst thing ever. And so just, take that extra little bit of time to make sure that whatever you're looking for is out there, so that you can set up your project to be successful, and, to cost you less really in the long run. And the other thing is just to be aware of the finite resources that producers will have. I give a Wagyu beef example. So if, we talk about traditional agriculture, it can be easier to kind of picture. So imagine you have a farmer, we're going to call it Farmer, I don't know, Sarah. And Farmer Sarah has been producing beef forever. She produces awesome, awesome Black Angus. And a customer comes to her and says, I really want Wagyu beef. Like I'm super keen on Wagyu. That's what I want. Can you do it for me? And she says, okay, well, I'm going to have to go find, some Wagyu genetics. Like I'm going to have to find some sperm and some heifers. And so I'm going to have to travel for that. Okay. I'm going to have to, make a deal with a producer and go through all of that legalese of like, who can produce Wagyu? What does it look like? I've got to travel, got to get the cows, got to bring them back here, all that. Okay. And then, I'm going to have enough land for this. So in about 2 years, I'll have some Wagyu for you. And then the buyer says, okay, cool. Well, call me in 2 years. But there's no assurance to that farmer that in 2 years that customer is going to buy the Wagyu beef. So it can be kind of a tall order to ask that farmer to do that for them. What would really work is a agreement where, I'm going to buy this Wagyu for you at this price in 2 years. I'm committed. So just be aware that, this takes a really long time and it does take a lot of resources to get these species produced. And so if you haven't been having those conversations, you may not find what you're looking for. And if you really want to see them, you may have to sign on for a multi-year agreement with a grower so that you can find what you need. Otherwise, it's kind of neither here nor there for growers. It's just too much risk. And the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of finite resources is there is a little bit of chatter about, we need like this really regional genetics for this and really regional genetics for that. And I wanted to chat a little bit about what that can look like and how that can be really difficult sometimes. And so we've had, a couple folks come up to us in the last month and say, okay, I have this stock seed from this specific area. Can you grow it out for me? Because I want to keep this genetics. And we're like, cool, that would be really fun. But here's the problem. Say you come to a grower and you have smooth blue aster from, I don't know, the Peterborough area. And your nearest grower is 200 kilometers away and you want them to grow it for you. Well, the problem is when they set up a production plot, if we look at this map, they're going to have fallow areas all over their farm. Every farm does. So that's where things grow wild. So if they have any smooth blue aster in their fallow, it's going to hybridize with your smooth blue aster and your genetics are going to change. So it can be really, really difficult to try to be exact in a world where, you've got like genetics moving all the time. So my advice there is don't let perfect get in the way of better. Sometimes these things are possible and sometimes, better is great. But we do struggle a bit with that as a grower that, sometimes these very specific genetic crops are just not possible because we don't want to be getting rid of the genetics around our farm either. So just, the kind of take home there is that there really are finite resources for growers. So to just have those conversations, communication is so key. So some of the resources that we have, I'm mindful of time. We have 8 minutes. Geez, sorry guys, I talked way too long. I've got some QR codes here. Feel free to scan them. This is a decision-making tool that we pulled together to help with practitioners when they're starting a project. Again, this is not every single thing you're going to have to think about, but it can help you, especially if you're new to this space, of what to think about and what information you're going to need to keep moving along. We also have some great guides and ID documents that we've developed over the years actually. If you are interested, this QR code will take you to some of those. I'm sure this presentation will be available afterward too. So we've got some of that to help you with your project planning. And then we've got some more information about seed stratification. And then we pulled together some of the most helpful best practice documents on how to establish a wildflower meadow that we found our customers find to be the most comprehensive and useful. So that's also at that QR code. And to finish, I've just got some pictures of our producers here. We have some producers who produce veggies for us too, hence the beautiful watermelon. But yeah, so these are some of the folks who are, bringing awesome seed to you. And then my team in the upper right, and my contact info as well. If we don't have time to have these conversations today, I'm happy to keep chatting with anyone who has questions or feedback or ideas.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful, really helpful presentation. I learned a lot and really enjoyed it. I see that the audience has a couple of questions that they've entered in the Q&A chat, and maybe for the next few minutes we can go over some of those. And if anybody else has any other questions, please feel free to add them to the chat or reach out to Jenny, as she's mentioned. Thanks, Jenny, for sharing your contact info as well. So the first question comes from Allison, who asks, do you do more wild collection on public or private land?
So we do a combination of actually a whole bunch of things. So we have really developed our program for wild collection in the last year. So we collect on our farm, and then we have permission to collect in a whole bunch of other places. So some of them are owned by different land management NGOs. Some of them are municipal properties. We have a few private landowners who have provided permission. So we have kind of a whole suite of places we go for different things. And so that's a whole other conversation too, is like where, you can collect on Crown land sustainably. And depending where you live, there might be municipal bylaws that allow or don't allow for collection in municipal property. So that's a whole other kind of piece. But for us, we have a whole variety of spaces, usually within a 3-hour radius of us, where we will collect.
Okay, wonderful. There was a question from Sheena that asks, would you have information on native sedge production?
I could probably find some for you. We have not field grown native sedges. We wild collect a few because we haven't really endeavored to learn how to field grow them. But I could see what I can find for you, but we don't have firsthand knowledge there, unfortunately.
Okay, great. So there's a question here from Sammy. So how do you get the Oz off Elymus and other grass species? And she said, was admiring the lack of Oz mixing them into a prairie broadcasting blend.
So that's a whole other thing. So how to clean seed is specific to the variety you're cleaning, the equipment you have, and how clean you have to get it. So if you have to get it to a commercial level of clean, which is dictated by the Seed Act, so there's only a certain percentage of non-seed material you're allowed for commercial grades, depending the table that the species fits into. You're going to need a lot more equipment, a lot more knowledge. you're going to need experienced techs who know how to use all of the settings on your equipment. But if you are using the seed for yourself or for a partner where you're not selling it, it's not coming into market, that can be a lot more flexible. And so in those situations, really all you've got to do is have that seed become shelf stable. So you need to dry it so there's nothing in there that will rot. And that applies to almost all of the seed we use in Canada, like orthodox seed, which can be dried. There's a little bit of recalcitrant species, but not many that need to stay like wet, but most can be dried, shelf stable. So once it's dry, there's some really rudimentary cleaning processes. Some of them use like fans and bags and tarps that you can do very easily on your own to remove a lot of that matter. It won't be commercial grade, but it will be good enough for your own uses. So yeah, but that's a whole world. It's a whole other universe.
Wonderful, thank you. Steve asks, are your seed sources primarily from your region or across Ontario?
So our seeds, well, okay, so our seed sources in terms of like the northern wildflowers. So we are in the Sudbury area. So if you're looking at the tree seed zone map, which wasn't developed for Forbes, but if you're looking at that, we're zone 27. And then we will collect and wild collect within a like 3-hour radius of us. And then if it's something we can't grow on our farm, we will bring on a contract grower to produce it for us. And those, you know, we kind of match the seed to the project. And so if we have a grower in, you know, for example, in like southern Quebec, and their seed matches a project, we'll use their seed. So we're always getting like as close to origin as possible. But it is tough. Canada is really big and there are not seed producers everywhere. So we sort of, you know, do the best we can there.
Great, thank you. So John is asking, is there a way to prevent hybridization with non-native varieties similar to our native wildflowers in a field grow setup? Also, is there a system in place to determine the best layout for what species can grow next to each other?
Okay, so is there a way to prevent hybridization with non-natives? Well, so in like traditional agriculture, you'll have an isolation distance for different varieties. So, so that's the distance that you have to keep things apart to keep pollinators from pollinating, or wind from, you know, them pollinating one another. And so we follow isolation distances for a lot of traditional agriculture species. There's a lot of missing knowledge there in terms of like what are they specifically for different native groups of plants. There hasn't been enough research there. So you can follow those isolation distances. So for most, it's like 1,000 meters to 5,000 meters. So that's your surest way of ensuring there isn't hybridization. But also within that vein, like there's some things we just know we can't grow on our farm because they'll just hybridize with the fallow stuff we have growing. So we have to select what we're growing that way too, and you may have to as well. But that's the best way, is just that distance. And what was the other half of that question? There's the hybridization.
Is there a system in place to determine the best layout for what species can grow next to each other?
I mean, that's something that as a producer, that's something that you'll want to spend some time kind of researching, because it will vary according to your farm, what you have the capacity for and what you're growing. So that will, you know, there's no one size fits all there, unfortunately. So that's just part of developing that expertise as a grower.
Okay, and there's 2 more questions, and as we're late, we will stop after these 2 questions, or we're running a bit late. So the first question is from Colleen saying, many native plant gardeners collect seed from their gardens and share seed year after year, or grow plants from that seed. Oh, sorry, my pop-up message blocked my grow plants from that seed and distribute plants. Is there a genetic diversity concern here?
It depends what the seed is being used for. As a gardener, I would have no concern putting that in like a garden. We would not look at that seed as a viable source for seed for restoration, because there's just too much risk that it's, that it's not wild type, and that, where does it come from, this and that. But it's really kind of up to you as a gardener what you're comfortable with. But for restoration, we really make sure that it's wild type seed and not domestic, or hybrid stock.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And the last question we'll address today is from John. If we are collecting seeds locally and using them locally, do we have to worry about the seed regulation?
So the seed regulation is really about the trade of seed. So it's about selling seed. So if you're not selling seed, no. There are some things though, that you do need to think about, even if you're not selling seed. The regulations dictate that you cannot transport, move, or hold a variety of noxious species. So you'll just want to be aware of that. You know what I mean? You don't want to have like a stock of like Phragmites seed in the back of your car, unless you're working on something really specific and you have, whatever permissions required. So the regulations do speak a little bit to that piece. But other than that, no, like if it's not for market, if it's not for trade, then you don't really have to worry.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate again your presentation and your help with all of those questions. There's some thanks and acknowledgements for you in the chat as well. So just thank you very much again. That was wonderful. Your wealth of knowledge on these topics, and really appreciate it, you sharing it with all of us today. If anyone has questions for Jenny, you can get in touch with me as well. I'll be happy to relay them. So I'd like to thank you again, and to thank all the audience for joining us as well. So we're going to shut down the meeting, and thanks again. Sorry that we went a little bit over, but thanks, Jenny. That was just amazing. Really wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you.